The Dowager Duchess of Ashbourne lifted one gloved finger, pointed it the length of her own drawing room, and said, in a voice as smooth and cold as the marble beneath their feet, "That woman is a liar, a thief's daughter, and she will leave my house before this night is out." 40 people turned to look. It was the last evening of the autumn gathering at Ashbourne Park, and the great drawing room glittered the way only money can make a room glitter. 300 candles, silk the colour of crushed plums and old gold, diamonds at every throat. A fire so large it could have warmed a cottage for a winter, and beside it, the family of Ashbourne arranged like a portrait of everything England told its poor to admire and never ever to touch. And in the centre of all that light stood a young woman in a plain grey gown. No jewels, no silk. A governess's dress, neat and worn soft at the cuffs, the dress of a woman paid to be invisible. Her name, as far as anyone in that room believed, was Miss Eleanor Grey. She was 24 years old. She had come to Ashbourne to mind 2 little girls and their pianoforte lessons, and she had been told 100 times in 100 small ways that she did not belong above stairs. She was not running. That was the thing the room could not understand. A governess, accused before her betters, ought to have wept, or fainted, or fled. Eleanor Grey did none of these things. She stood with her spine straight and her chin level, and in her hands, held against the grey of her gown, the way a soldier holds a colour that must not fall, was a slim packet of letters, tied with a faded ribbon that had once been blue. At the far end of the room, beneath a portrait of his own dead father, stood Julian, Duke of Ashbourne, the most powerful man in 3 counties. A man who could ruin a family with a sentence and had done so more than once. He had gone very still. Not the stillness of a man who is bored, or a man who is waiting. The stillness of a man who has just seen something walk toward him out of a part of his life he had buried, and bricked over, and prayed never to see again. He was looking at the letters. "You will not speak," the Dowager said, and her voice cracked like ice underfoot. "You will not look at my son. You will gather your things, and you will be grateful that I do not send for the magistrate. Do you understand me, girl?" Eleanor Grey looked at the old woman for a long moment, and then she did the one thing no one in that room had braced for. She smiled, not in triumph, not in cruelty. She smiled the way a person smiles when a weight they have carried for 6 years is finally about to be set down. "My name," she said, and her voice carried, clear, unhurried, reaching every corner of that hushed and glittering room, "is not Grey." The fire spat. No one breathed. "My name is Eleanor Hartley. I am the daughter of Sir Henry Hartley of Wexcombe, the man this family called a forger, the man this family ruined, the man who died of it." She lifted the packet of letters a little, into the candlelight, so that everyone could see it. "And before I leave this house tonight, Your Grace, I am going to tell every soul in this room what your father truly did." She turned to the Duke, to Julian, and the question she asked him was very soft and very gentle, and it landed in that room like a blade laid flat against a throat. "Read them aloud," Eleanor said. "Or shall I?" "Now, I am going to leave them there a moment. The old woman, the silent crowd, the Duke beneath his father's painted face, and the girl in grey holding the truth in both hands. Because to understand how a governess came to stand in a duke's drawing room with the power to destroy him, we have to go a long way back. 6 years back, to a comfortable house in the country, and a girl who had never wanted anything but to be left in peace. But before I take you there, Wherever you are in the world right now, I want you to do something for me. Tell me, down in the comments, where you are listening from. A kitchen at midnight, a long drive home, a quiet room where the rest of the house is asleep. I genuinely love to know who is out there in the dark with me. And if this story takes hold of you, if you feel that pull already, then come and sit by my fire properly. Subscribe to Jane Tells Stories so that the next time I have a tale like this one, it finds its way to you. Think of it as a small favor between the two of us. And if you don't subscribe, well, then you shall simply owe me one. Now, come back with me. 6 years and a long way south. Picture a house, not a grand one. Wexcombe Grange was never grand, but a warm one. Honey-coloured stone with ivy at the corners, a walled garden gone gloriously untidy, and a long room at the back where the afternoon sun pooled on the floorboards like spilled tea. This was the house Eleanor Hartley was born into, and for the first 18 years of her life she believed, the way the safe and the loved always believe, that the floor beneath her feet was solid and would always be there. Her father was Sir Henry Hartley, a baronet. Now, you must understand what that meant and what it did not. It meant the family was gentry, old enough, respectable enough, to be received everywhere that mattered in the county. It did not mean they were rich. Sir Henry had land that paid modestly, a baronetcy that paid nothing at all, and a horror of debt that he had inherited from his own ruined father and clung to like a religion. "We are not great people, Eleanor," he used to tell her, "but we are honest ones, and an honest name outlasts a great one." He believed that. He believed it the way other men believed in God. He was, by every account, a gentle man. Too gentle, perhaps, for the world he had to live in. He read history. He kept bees. He could not pass a wounded creature without stopping. And he adored his 2 children with a completeness that left no room for anything else, because their mother had died bringing the second of them into the world. That second child was a boy. Thomas. Eleanor was 6 years old when Thomas was born, and from the moment they put that small, frowning, struggling bundle into her arms, something in her settled into place and decided, without asking anyone's permission, that this was hers to protect. Thomas was never a strong child. His chest was weak. The damp got into it every winter and would not let go. He was clever and funny and far too thin, and Eleanor loved him with the fierce, particular love of a sister who has half raised her own brother. Remember that love. It is going to matter very much before we are through. So that was the house of Hartley. A gentle father, a clever, ailing boy, and Eleanor, sharp-minded, quick-tongued, happiest with a book or in the wild green tangle of that garden. They were not important. They were not rich. They were happy, and they were safe, and they had no notion at all of how thin the floor truly was. Now I must tell you about the man who broke it. Augustus, the old Duke of Ashbourne, Julian's father, was important. He was rich. He was the great man of the whole region, and Sir Henry Hartley, in the modest way of a modest man, was proud to be of some small use to him. For Sir Henry, you see, had a careful, honest head for figures, and over the years the old Duke had fallen into the habit of letting him look over certain accounts, witness certain papers, carry certain quiet business between the great house and the men of money in London. It flattered Sir Henry, a duke's confidence. He did not see, how could a gentleman see it, that he was being chosen not for his skill, but for exactly the opposite quality. He was being chosen because he trusted, because he would sign where he was told to sign, and witness what he was asked to witness, and never once think to ask why. For the old Duke of Ashbourne, beneath all that marble and all those candles, was a man being eaten alive from the inside by debt. Cards, mostly. The deep, ruinous, midnight kind of card-playing that swallows estates whole. He had mortgaged what could be mortgaged and borrowed against what could be borrowed, and still it was not enough. And a duke cannot simply stop. A duke must go on glittering, or the whole edifice shows its cracks. So the old duke did a thing that desperate proud men have always done. He began to raise money on paper that was not honest. Promissory notes, bonds, instruments drawn on names and securities that he had no true right to pledge. And he needed those papers to look beyond question. He needed them witnessed by a man of unimpeachable reputation, an honest man, a gentle man, a baronet who would sign where he was told and never ask why. Do you see it now? Do you see what Sir Henry Hartley was for? For a few years it held. And then, as these things always do, it came apart. A London creditor grew, suspicious. Questions were asked. And the old Duke of Ashbourne, with the floor opening under his own feet, looked about himself for something to throw into the hole, and his eye fell on the gentle baronet from Wexcombe. It was almost elegant what he did. That is the cruelest part. The Duke went to the authorities himself. He, the wronged nobleman, came forward in sorrow and outrage to report that his trust had been abused, that his quiet man of business, Sir Henry Hartley, had been forging his name, forging the Duke's signature on instruments, drawing money in the Duke's name, and that he, the Duke, horrified, had only just discovered the betrayal. And who would the world believe? A duke, weeping with noble grief? Or a frightened country baronet, swearing through white lips that the Duke had known, that the Duke had directed every stroke of the pen, that he, Sir Henry, had only ever done what his great patron asked of him? I will tell you who the world believed. The world believed the Duke. The world always believes the Duke. They did not hang Sir Henry Hartley. I want you to understand that, because in those years they hanged men for less, and the fact that they did not was itself a kind of arranged mercy. A dead baronet asks questions. A ruined one is simply forgotten. They did something quieter and, in its way, more complete. They destroyed him. The land was sold to make good the fraud. The baronetcy became a thing whispered about behind fans. Old friends discovered urgent reasons to be elsewhere. And the gentle man who had built his whole life on the single belief that an honest name outlasts a great one, watched his honest name dragged through every drawing room in the county, while the great name that had done the thing sailed on, untouched, serene. Eleanor was 18. She stood in the courtroom. She heard her father say, again and again, in a voice that grew smaller each time, "The Duke knew. I have letters." The Duke knew. And she watched grand men look at the floor, and she understood, with a clarity that never afterward left her, that the truth and the verdict are two entirely different things, and that the second is decided by who is standing where. Sir Henry Hartley did not live a year. It was not any single illness. It was, as the country people said with more truth than they knew, a broken heart. A man whose whole frame had been built around one belief, and the belief had been knocked out, and the frame came down. Eleanor sat with him at the end. He was not thinking of the land, or the money, or his name. He held her hand and he said, "Look after Thomas." And then, fainter, the last full sentence her father ever gave her. "And Eleanor, the truth does not die because no one will hear it. Keep it. Keep it for me." She did not understand those words that night. She thought them the wandering of a dying mind. She was wrong. And in 3 years' time, in the bottom of an old travelling desk that no one had thought worth selling, Eleanor Hartley was going to find out exactly what her father had meant. Here is what the fall of a house actually looks like when the courtroom has emptied and the newspapers have moved on. It looks like arithmetic. Eleanor was 24 now. We have come forward, you and I, to the months before that drawing room, and her arithmetic was very simple and very pitiless. There was herself. There was Thomas, 15 now, still thin, still with that treacherous chest, placed in a charitable school of the cheaper kind, the sort of place that keeps a boy fed and little else. And there was no one and nothing else at all. No land, no relation who would own them, no name she could use without watching a face change. So Eleanor Hartley did the only honest thing left to a gentlewoman with no fortune and a brother to keep alive. She went into service. She became a governess. But she could not do it as a Hartley. The name was poison. The name would close every door before she reached it. And so, with her father's voice in her ears, "Keep it for me," Eleanor folded the name Hartley away, deep and safe, and she walked into the world as Miss Eleanor Grey. Grey, a colour that asks for nothing and is easily overlooked. She chose it on purpose. For 2 years, Miss Grey was the governess in the household of a family called Pemberton. And I want you to see her there, because the woman who walked into the Duke's drawing room did not appear out of nothing. She was forged in these quiet years, the way a blade is forged, by heat and by hammering. The Pembertons were not unkind. That is the most that can be said. They were comfortable country people of the middling sort, a little vain of their comfort, and Mrs. Pemberton was the kind of mistress who confused a soft voice with a soft heart. Eleanor had 2 pupils, Sophie, who was 8, and Augusta, who was 11, and into those 2 little girls Eleanor poured everything she had. Not merely the globes and the French verbs and the endless, dreary samplers. She taught them to think. She taught them that a clever question was a finer thing to own than a clever bonnet. She read to them in voices, and she let them be muddy in the garden. And both those small girls loved their governess with the uncomplicated fierceness of children, which was very nearly the only love Eleanor had left in the world that did not have a price on it. Because a governess, you must understand, lives nowhere. She is too well bred to sit with the servants and too poor to sit with the family. She eats a little apart. She is in every room and belongs to none of them. She is spoken about in her hearing as though she were a piece of furniture with good references. And Eleanor, who had grown up adored, in a sunlit room, the daughter of a baronet, felt every inch of that no place, every single day, and let none of it show on her face. That was the hammering. That was the forging. The world had set out to teach Eleanor Hartley that she was small, and instead it had taught her something far more dangerous. It had taught her to be still, to watch, to keep her own counsel and read a room the way her father had once read a column of figures. It had taught her that her own face was a door she alone decided whether to open. She had her quiet strength. She had her sharp, hidden mind. And she had, locked in the bottom of her trunk, wrapped in an old shawl that had been her mother's, a slim packet of letters tied with a ribbon that had once been blue. Now I must tell you how she came to have them, because this is the secret she carried into Ashbourne, and everything turns upon it. 3 years after her father's death, Eleanor had at last brought herself to go through the last of his things: a battered travelling desk, the writing box of a man who had spent his life with papers, scarred and ink-stained and worth nothing to anyone. She had been looking only for keepsakes. A pressed flower, his hand on a page. Instead, her fingers found the join, the false flaw that a careful man builds into his desk and tells no one of. And under it, flat and yellowing, lay letters in a hand she knew at once, because she had seen it on 100 grand invitations in her childhood. The old Duke of Ashbourne's hand. Eleanor sat on the floor of a rented room and read her father's innocence. For that is what those letters were. Letter after letter, in the old Duke's own pen, instructing Sir Henry, "You will sign the enclosed. You will witness as before. Do not trouble yourself with the figures. That is my affair. Only sign." And one letter above all the rest, written before any creditor had grown suspicious, before there was any thought of discovery, in which the Duke wrote plainly of what he was about, and named the false securities, and called the whole arrangement, in a careless, aristocratic phrase that turned Eleanor's blood to ice water, "Our little fiction. Our little fiction." Sir Henry had kept them. Through the trial, through the ruin, through the dying, he had kept them, hidden, and never used them. Why? Perhaps because he was a gentle man to the very end and could not bring himself to it. Perhaps because he knew, wise even in his despair, that a ruined baronet who accused a duke would simply be ruined again, harder. Perhaps he was keeping them for a day when they might be safe to use, and the day never came. The truth does not die because no one will hear it. Keep it for me. Now she understood. She had been carrying her father's last instruction in the bottom of a trunk for 3 years without knowing it. And here, my friends, is the part of Eleanor Hartley that I most want you to hold on to, because it is the hinge of everything, and a smaller person would have done the smaller thing. A smaller person, holding those letters, would have gone to the old Duke's heir, would have gone quietly to the new Duke of Ashbourne and said, "Here is proof your father was a thief. Pay me, and I will burn it." It would have worked. Dukes pay. She and Thomas could have been comfortable for life on that single transaction. Eleanor never once considered it, not for a heartbeat, because she did not want the Duke of Ashbourne's money. The thought of it sickened her. What had been taken from her father was not money, money he had never greatly had. What had been taken was his name, his honest name, the one thing he had truly owned, the thing he had told her outlasts a great name. And a name cannot be bought back in a quiet transaction. A name can only be cleared the way it was destroyed, out loud, in the open, in front of the same world bavard that watched it fall. So Eleanor did not plot blackmail. She did something the world would have thought far madder and far more dangerous for a penniless governess to attempt. She began, very patiently, to plan a reckoning. It would be a fine thing to tell you that Eleanor's arrival at the gates of Ashbourne was the work of chance, that fate, with a flourish, simply delivered her to the Duke's door. It was not chance. I told you the world had taught this woman to be still, and to watch, and to wait. And now I will show you what such a woman does, with patience. For 2 years, as Miss Grey, she had listened. A governess hears everything. No one guards their tongue before the furniture. And she had learned, slowly, the shape of the great family she meant one day to face. She had learned that the old Duke was dead, had died, in fact, only a year or so after her own father, the 2 ruined hearts going down within a season of each other, though only one of them was mourned. She had learned that the title had passed to his son, Julian. And she had learned, this last year, a single piece of news that made her set down her sewing and sit very still for a long time. Mrs. Pemberton, it transpired, was a cousin, a distant, threadbare, eager sort of cousin, but a cousin nonetheless, of the Dowager Duchess of Ashbourne. And every autumn the Dowager held a gathering at Ashbourne Park, and every autumn she condescended to invite her poor relations, the Pembertons, because a great family likes a few poor relations about to feel great beside. The Pembertons always went, and where the Pembertons went, so went their two daughters, and where the daughters went their governess. Eleanor did not arrange the invitation. She did not need to. She simply made herself, over 2 careful years, so wholly indispensable to the running of those 2 little girls that it could not have occurred to Mrs. Pemberton to leave Miss Grey behind. The patience of it. She did not force a single door. She only stood, quietly, where the doors would in time open of their own accord, and waited, for 2 years, until the season came round and the cream-coloured card arrived, and Mrs. Pemberton said, fluttering, "Miss Grey, you will come, of course. The girls cannot manage strange company without you." And Eleanor Hartley lowered her eyes and said, "Of course, ma'am," and felt the whole long machine of 6 years click forward one final notch. She was going to Ashbourne Park. She was going to walk in through the front gate, invited, unsuspected, with her father's innocence sewn into the lining of her travelling case. Now let me set the scene for you, because Ashbourne Park is not a house. It is an argument. It is an argument, made in stone and parkland and 300 years of accumulated certainty, that some people are simply finer than others, and that the finer people are precisely the ones who happen to live at Ashbourne. The drive alone is 2 miles. The house rises at the end of it, pale and enormous and beautiful, and entirely without warmth, like a handsome face that has never once been kind. Eleanor watched it grow in the carriage window, and felt her own smallness arranged around her like a costume, the plain dress, the place at the back, the governess folded in among the boxes. And she let it sit there, and she did not let it touch the thing inside her that was made of steel. And on the steps of that house, waiting, were the 2 people I must now make you understand. The first was the Dowager Duchess. You met her in that drawing-room, the gloved finger, the voice like ice. Lady Honoria, Dowager Duchess of Ashbourne. She was perhaps 60, straight as a poker, and she had given her entire life to a single faith, and the faith was the family name. Not the people in the family, the name. The Ashbourne name was the only god she had ever knelt to, and she would have fed any living soul into a fire to keep that name unspotted, and considered herself virtuous for doing it. Keep her in your eye. Cold people who worship a name are never quite as simple as they look, and Lady Honoria was hiding more than her years. And the second, coming down the steps now, unhurried, while the whole arriving company seemed to lean toward him the way plants lean toward a window, was the Duke. Julian, Duke of Ashbourne. He was 33. He had held the title for 6 years, since the death of the father whose portrait you have already seen, and in those 6 years he had become, in the language of the county, a formidable man, which is the word polite people use when they mean frightening. And he had earned it. Let me be honest with you about him, because the easy thing would be to make him gentle from the first page, and he was not gentle. There was a man, a Mr. Aldous, who had once thought to cheat the Ashbourne estate over the lease of a mill, and the Duke of Ashbourne had not shouted, had not threatened, had simply, methodically, over the course of 1 quiet year, called in every small advantage the law allowed him until Mr. Aldous and Mr. Aldous's cleverness were both entirely undone. Everyone in the county knew that story. It was told as a warning. The Duke of Ashbourne, they said, was a man you did not cross, because he did not lose his temper, and he did not forgive, and he did not ever forget. He was, in other words, Exactly the kind of man Eleanor had every reason to hate on sight. The heir of the house that killed her father. Powerful, cold, controlled. A man with the proven habit of grinding lesser people into the dust without once raising his voice. When Eleanor Hartley first saw Julian, Duke of Ashbourne, from the back of that carriage, she did not see a man at all. She saw the enemy, wearing very good tailoring. But here is what she also saw, in that first half-minute, and could not make fit. She saw him pause on the steps to speak to a footman who had dropped and broken something, a great heavy thing, an expensive thing, and she braced, the way the whole forecourt visibly braced, for the famous Ashbourne coldness to fall on the poor man's head. It did not. The Duke said 3 or 4 words, low, and the footman's frightened shoulders came down, and the matter was simply over. And she saw, when his gaze passed across the arriving carriages, across the Pembertons, across the boxes, across the grey, unimportant Governess folded in among them, she saw it catch, for the briefest instant, on her. Not with interest. With something else. With the flicker of a man who has glimpsed a face he half knows and cannot place, and who files it away, frowning very slightly to be solved later. It meant nothing to Eleanor then. She made herself small and looked at her hands and got down from the carriage, a servant among servants. But I want you to mark it, because it was not nothing. It was the very first thread of the thing that was going to undo them both. The Duke of Ashbourne had looked at the governess in grey, and somewhere far down in him, in a room he kept locked, something had stirred and said, "I know you." For 3 days, nothing happened, and everything began. A great house party is a kind of theatre, and a governess is a stagehand, present at every performance, named in none of them. Eleanor moved through those first days of Ashbourne in the proper invisibility of her station. She kept Sophie and Augusta brushed, drilled, and out from underfoot. She took her meals in the schoolroom or a step apart. She watched the brilliant company assemble and glitter through the long rooms, and she watched the Duke move among them, and she learned him the way she had learned everything else in her hard apprenticeship, quietly, completely, giving nothing back. And she learned in those 3 watching days the thing the county gossip had not told her. The county said the Duke of Ashbourne was cold. The county was not exactly wrong, but Eleanor, who had made a life's study of the faces people show and the faces they hide, saw past it within a day, and what she saw unsettled her badly, because it did not fit the shape of the enemy she had come to face. The Duke was not cold. The Duke was guarded. There is a difference, and only someone who has spent 6 years guarding herself can see it at a glance. A cold man is empty. A guarded man is the opposite of empty. A guarded man is holding something so heavy with both hands that he dares not put it down to embrace anyone. Eleanor watched the Duke of Ashbourne be charming and correct and untouchable the length of a dinner table, and she watched him, in an unwatched moment by a window, let the charm fall off his face like a dropped cloak, and underneath it was not contempt at all. Underneath it was something that looked, to Eleanor's practised and unwilling eye, very much like a man who was tired to his bones of something he could not name aloud. She did not want to see it. It is far easier to ruin an enemy who is simply a monster. She put the observation away, annoyed with herself, and resolved to think of him only as the name on the gate. And then, on the 4th night, the library. Eleanor could not sleep. The night before a reckoning, even a reckoning still days off, does not give up its sleep easily. And she had learned that a sleepless governess in a great house may go quietly down to the library, where no fashionable person ever ventures after dark, and borrow an hour of peace and a book. She slipped down in her plain wrapper, a single candle in her hand, and she let herself into the long, dim, book-walled room, expecting it to be empty. It was not empty. The Duke of Ashbourne was sitting in it, alone, in the dark, with a single branch of candles and no book at all, simply looking at the cold and empty grate. She should have withdrawn. Every law of her position commanded her to murmur an apology and vanish. And she would have. She had already begun the small backward step, except that he turned his head and looked at her, and said, in a voice with none of the dinner-table polish on it, quite plainly, "Stay, please. I find I am sick of my own company, and you do not look as though you mean to flatter me." It was the please that undid her caution. Dukes do not say please to governesses. It costs them nothing to omit it, and so they omit it. "I came for a book, Your Grace," Eleanor said. "I did not mean to disturb you. You teach the Pemberton children." It was not quite a question. He had noticed her then. He had placed the grey dress against its household. Sophia and the elder one. "Augusta, yes. And what do you teach them that keeps you from sleeping?" And here, my friends, is where Eleanor Hartley made her first mistake, or her first surrender, for the two are often the same thing. The safe answer, the governess's answer, was globes and music and a little French, Your Grace. Small, grey, forgettable. But it was past midnight, and she was very tired, and she had spent 6 years biting her tongue half through, and the cold grate and the honest, unguarded voice of this man she had come to destroy reached into her and pulled out the truth instead. "I teach them not to be afraid of their own minds," Eleanor said. "Everyone else they will ever meet will be at pains to teach them the opposite. I consider it the only lesson that matters, and so I generally save it for last, and we do the globes first to keep their mother content." There was a silence, and then the Duke of Ashbourne laughed. A real laugh, short and surprised, the laugh of a man who has not been startled into one for a long while, and Eleanor felt it land somewhere under her ribs, and she was furious with herself for the warmth of it. They talked. I will not give you every word, because the wonder of that hour was not in any single thing said, but in the strange, weightless honesty of it, the honesty that is only possible between two people who each believe the other to be no one in particular. He thought her a clever governess of no consequence. She let him. And because he believed she was no one, the Duke of Ashbourne said things he had not said aloud to his equals in years. About the house being a museum he was obliged to keep dusted. About his father, of whom he spoke very little and very carefully, the way a man steps around a place in the floor he knows to be rotten. About the particular loneliness of a man whom everyone needs and no one quite likes. And Eleanor, because she believed herself safe behind the name Grey, was sharper and truer and more wholly herself than she had let herself be with another adult in 6 years. It should have been an hour of espionage. She had come to Ashbourne to study this family for its weaknesses. And instead, Eleanor sat in the dark with the enemy and forgot, for whole minutes together, to hate him. And every time she remembered, the remembering hurt a little more than it had the time before. When at last she rose to go, the Duke said a thing that stopped her at the door. "Miss Grey." She turned. He was looking at her with that small frown again, the one from the carriage drive, the one that meant a man working at a lock. "Have we met? Before this house? I have the most particular sense that I have heard you speak before, and I cannot for my life place where." Eleanor's heart performed one hard, painful stroke against her ribs. "I do not see how, Your Grace," she said, and her voice did not betray her. 6 years of practice held the line. I am quite sure I would remember a duke. Hmm. He did not look satisfied. He looked like a man laying a thing aside, not putting it away. Good night, Miss Grey. She got herself up the stairs and into her cold little room and sat down on the edge of the bed with her unlit candle in her hands, and she made herself say it plainly in the dark, because Eleanor Hartley never lied to anyone, least of all to herself. She had come to Ashbourne to ruin a man, and the man had a real laugh and a haunted face, and he had said please to her, and she had felt the warmth of being truly seen for the first time in 6 years, and it had been him who saw her, the enemy, the name on the gate. This, she understood, was going to be very much harder than arithmetic. I want to stop here and be honest with you about who knew what, because we have come to the turning of the whole story, and a twist is only worth anything if you can see clearly the ground it is twisting. Eleanor knew this, that her father had been innocent, that the old Duke had been guilty, and that she carried, in the lining of her case, the letters that proved it. She believed the present Duke, Julian, to be his father's heir in every sense, proud, untouched, complicit by blood if not by deed, a man who had eaten his whole life from a table laid with stolen plate and never thought to ask where the silver came from. She had come to make him hear the truth in public, before the world, whether he willed it or no. That is what Eleanor knew. Now I must tell you what Eleanor did not know, and it is the first of the 2 great twists in this tale, and it had been sitting quietly inside Julian, Duke of Ashbourne, like a splinter under the skin, for 6 long years. Cast your mind back to the old Duke's deathbed. The county remembered it, if it remembered it at all, as a grand and proper passing, a great man gone, the house in mourning, the heir come into his own. But there had been a night, near the end, that no one outside that sick room ever knew of. The old Duke, burnt down to almost nothing by his fever, had gripped his son's wrist with a strength the dying are not supposed to have, and had begun to talk. Not the calm farewells of the stage, the other kind. The kind that comes pouring out of a man when the fever has knocked down the walls, and the thing that was bricked up behind them comes through into the light at last. He had talked of cards, of debt, of papers that were not honest, and he had said, Julian, 23 then, a young man holding a candle and his father's wrist and the cold beginning of horror, he had said a name. Hartley. He had said, weeping, raving, I let Hartley take it. I knew. God forgive me, the man begged, and I knew, and I let them take it from him because better him than me, better him than the name. And then the fever had pulled him back under, and by morning he was calmer and spoke only of the estate and the chapel and his own soul, and within the week he was dead, and Julian was the Duke of Ashbourne, and the keeper of a confession he could not prove, could not name aloud, and could not, God help him, undo. He had tried. I want you to know that he had tried, because the man Eleanor came to ruin had spent 6 years quietly bleeding from the same wound she carried. In the first raw months of his dukedom, Julian had gone through his father's papers like a man searching a battlefield, and he had found enough, not the proof, never the proof, but enough, to know past doubting that his father had broken an honest man named Sir Henry Hartley of Wexcombe, and let the law do the burying. He had found that the man was dead of it. He had found that there had been children. And here is the thing that I must lay before you very carefully, because it is the heart of him. Julian, Duke of Ashbourne, was not a coward in any way the county would have recognised. He had a cold nerve that frightened grown men. But he was a coward in the one way that mattered most, and he knew it, and the knowing was the splinter. He could not bring himself to do the one thing that would have set it right. He could not stand up in the world that had made him and say aloud, "My father was a thief and a perjurer, and the great Ashbourne name you all bow to is built on a lie and on a dead innocent man." He told himself there was no proof. He told himself it would only resurrect the scandal and help no one. He told himself the dead cannot be repaid. All of it was true, and all of it was the elaborate, reasonable scaffolding that a frightened man builds around the thing he is too frightened to do. So he had done the smaller thing, the secret thing, the thing a man does instead of the brave thing, to keep himself from drowning entirely in his own contempt. He had found the boy, Thomas Hartley, the dead baronet's son, sickly, 15 years old, kept just barely fed in a hard, charitable school. And Julian, telling no one, not his mother, not his steward, had quietly become that boy's invisible benefactor. There was money arriving at the school 4 times a year from a London attorney who would say only that it came from a friend of the late Sir Henry's. Thomas Hartley had warm clothes that winter, and a doctor when his chest was bad, and the promise, laid down in instructions the boy himself had never seen, of a decent apprenticeship to a respectable apothecary when he came of age, a trade, a future, a life. None of it with the Ashbourne name anywhere near it. Julian had been paying down a debt in the dark, where no one could see him do it, and despising himself the whole time for not having the courage to pay it in the light. He did not know about the daughter. The attorney's inquiries, made carefully, had turned up a son in a school, and had simply lost the trace of a daughter who had walked out into England under a colour for a name. Julian assumed her married or in service or dead. He grieved her abstractly as a fact in a file. Now, hold both those people in your mind at once. The governess who believes the Duke is her enemy and is the heir of her family's destroyer. The Duke who has been the Hartley family's secret benefactor for 6 years and does not know that the cleverest, sharpest, most quietly furious person at his own house party is the daughter he lost the trace of. And let me tell you how the splinter began to work its way out. It was the children who did it, Sophie and Augusta, because children are honest in a house full of careful people, and honesty, let loose in a house full of careful people, is a kind of slow fuse. The little girls adored their governess, and they were not clever enough yet to know that one does not say so to a duke, and so when the Duke of Ashbourne, walking the long gallery, paused to be correct and kind to 2 small guests, 8-year-old Sophie looked up at him and informed him, with the tremendous earnestness of the very young, that Miss Grey was the cleverest person in the whole world and could recite whole battles, and that she had taught them a Latin grace and a song about a fox and never once said their questions were silly the way other people did. It should have meant nothing. It was a child praising her governess. But Julian had sat in a dark library and talked, for one strange, honest hour, with a grey-dressed woman who taught children not to fear their own minds. And a small frown came down between his brows, the carriage drive frown, the lock and key frown, and it did not go away. He began, without quite admitting to himself that he was doing it, to watch Miss Grey. Not as a man watches a woman he admires, though that was in it, and he was honest enough by now to know it was in it. He watched her as a man watches a thing that does not add up. He noticed that she flinched, very slightly, the first time she heard the family name spoken full and formal at table. The Hartley affair was quite the scandal of its year. Some guest dredging up old gossip, and the governess, 2 places down, had gone for 1/2 second perfectly white before the colour came back. He noticed that she knew the house. Not the way a guest learns a house in 4 days. She knew which gallery the old portraits hung in before she could have been told. She turned the right way at junctions a stranger would have got wrong, as though some part of her had studied a map of Ashbourne for a very long time. He noticed that her plain, careful governess's English came apart, here and there, into the cadences of a woman who had been bred a lady and trained out of showing it. And then, on the 6th day, he found the thing that turned the key. It was nothing. It was a list. Mrs. Pemberton, all flutter, had asked Miss Grey to write out the children's daily order for the nursery maid, and the slip of paper had been left on a console table in the hall, and Julian passed it, and Julian's eye fell on the handwriting, and Julian stopped walking. He knew that hand. Not the woman's hand. He had never seen the woman write. He knew the shape of it, the particular slope, the long-tailed G, the way the capitals were made. Because for 6 years, a London attorney had sent him, 4 times a year, the school's reports on the welfare of a boy named Thomas Hartley, and twice, early on, the boy himself had been made to write a short, dutiful note of thanks to his unknown benefactor, and Julian had kept those 2 notes in a locked drawer of his desk and taken them out, sometimes late, the way you press on a bruise to be sure it is still there. The boy's hand and the governess's hand were not the same hand, but they were the same blood's hand, the identical drilled, old-fashioned schooling. Brother and sister taught their letters at the same table by the same gentle, ruined man. And Julian Ashbourne stood in his own front hall with a nursery list in his fingers and felt the floor of 6 years tilt under him. He went, very quietly, and made certain. A word to his own steward, a discreet question, of the kind a duke may ask and have answered without anyone daring to wonder why. The Pembertons' household traced back, and the governess called Grey traced back with it, to a first post taken 6 years ago, references that did not quite bear weight when you pressed them, a name that began precisely where a different name left off. And so Julian, Duke of Ashbourne, came to know, alone, 2 days before that drawing room, the thing his mother did not know, and the governess did not know that he knew. Miss Grey was Eleanor Hartley, the lost daughter, the one the attorney's inquiries had failed to find. She had not been married, or in service in some far county, or dead. She was here. She had been under his roof for 6 days. She was sleeping 3 floors above him, teaching Latin graces to little girls, the daughter of the man his father had destroyed, and she had come here, of all the houses in England, here, and that could not, Julian knew, with a cold prickle down his spine, possibly be an accident. He did not go to her. Think on that. It tells you everything about him. A man like his father would have summoned her at once, frightened her, bought her, removed her. Julian did none of it. He carried the knowledge alone for 2 days, sleepless, and what he felt, turning it over in the dark, was not fear of exposure. It was something he had no recent practice at and barely recognized. It was something very close to hope. Because for 6 years he had been a coward in a locked room, and now the locked room had a person standing in it, the very person, the wronged blood itself, and Julian Ashbourne understood, with a feeling like a held breath, that the reckoning he had never had the courage to begin had just walked in through his own front gate, and that he was, God help him, almost glad. But there was another person at Ashbourne with sharp eyes, and while the Duke watched the governess with something like hope, his mother watched her with something far older and far colder, and the Dowager Duchess of Ashbourne missed nothing that happened beneath her roof. Lady Honoria had not survived 40 years at the top of her cruel and glittering world by being a fool. She had seen what the dinner-table company had been too dazzled to see. She had seen her son, her formidable, untouchable, marble son, turn his head when a governess came into a room. She had seen him linger near the nursery party. She had seen the precise, small, unmistakable evidence of a man's attention bending, against all sense and station, toward a woman in a grey dress. And the Dowager Duchess decided, with the swift, unsentimental efficiency she brought to everything, that the governess would have to go. You must understand it was not, at first, about the truth at all. Lady Honoria knew nothing yet of letters or of Hartleys. It was about the marriage. There was a Lady Caroline Vane staying in the house, handsome, dull, suitably born, with a fortune and a bloodline that the Dowager had selected for her son the way one selects a brood mare, and the match was as good as made, and the Dowager would no more permit a penniless governess to disturb that arrangement than she would permit a draught to disturb a fire. So she began, quietly, to tighten the room around Eleanor. It started small, and a smaller woman than Eleanor would not even have been able to prove it was happening. The schoolroom fire began to be forgotten. Eleanor's small comforts thinned. Mrs. Pemberton, who took her opinions the way a weather vane takes the wind, was got at, a word here, a raised brow there from her grand cousin, and began to look at her own governess with a new, anxious, faintly suspicious coolness, and to speak to her more sharply before the children. The other servants, Gittis, who feel the shift of power in a great house the way animals feel a coming storm, drew back from Miss Grey by degrees, until she was eating quite alone, and being answered slowly, and discovering that the no place a governess lives in can be made colder still, on purpose, by a hand that knows how. Eleanor felt the tightening and understood exactly what it was. She had not survived 6 years by misreading a room, but she could not yet see the whole of it. She believed it was only the ordinary spite of a great lady toward a presuming inferior, and she set her teeth and bent her head and endured, because the autumn gathering had only days left to run, and she had not yet found the moment for the thing she had come to do. She needed the company assembled. She needed the world in one room. She needed the Duke. So she endured the cold and the slights and waited for her moment, and did not know that her moment and her exposure were now racing each other toward the same night. Because the Dowager Duchess, not content to merely freeze the governess out, had set herself to learn her, to find the lever. A poor woman, Lady Honoria reasoned, always has a shameful place in her past. One need only find it. And so she did the thing that great houses can always do to the powerless. She had Miss Grey looked into, quietly, thoroughly. A letter to an acquaintance near the Pemberton's county, a few coins in the right palm, the patient unpicking of a stitched-up name. And 2 days before the end of the gathering, the Dowager Duchess of Ashbourne sat in her private morning room with a single sheet of paper in her hand, and read that the governess sleeping under her roof, the governess her son could not stop looking at, was not Eleanor Grey at all. She was Eleanor Hartley. She was the daughter of that Hartley, the forger, the very name, the very scandal, that the Dowager had spent 20 years and a great deal of effort helping the world to forget. Now I want you to watch the Dowager Duchess very closely in this moment, because here is the second small twist of the tale, and it is a quiet one, and it changes the colour of everything. A simple, proud woman, learning that a forger's daughter had crept under her roof, would have felt only outrage and contempt. The Dowager felt those, but under them, and her own hand trembled, just once, holding that paper, and Lady Honoria's hand had not trembled in 30 years. Under them she felt something else, and it was fear. Cold, personal, particular fear. Because the Dowager Duchess of Ashbourne had not been a girl when her husband ruined Sir Henry Hartley. She had been the mistress of this house, and a clever woman, and she had not believed her husband's noble grief for a single hour. She had known. Not the way Julian half knew, in fevered fragments. She had known plainly at the time, in cold blood, that her husband was a thief and that an innocent man was being fed to the law to save the name. And she had looked at that knowledge, and she had decided that the name was worth it. She had helped to bury it. She had received the ruined Hartley's old friends and made it comfortable for them to drop the acquaintance. She had been, in her cold and tidy way, her husband's accomplice, not in the forgery, but in the far longer crime of the silence. And now the dead forger's daughter was in her house, and her son could not stop looking at her. And the Dowager Duchess understood, with that one trembling hand, that this was not a matter of an unsuitable marriage any longer. This was the past itself, walking the galleries of Ashbourne, and it had to be stopped, wholly, finally, publicly, before it could open its mouth. So she did not simply dismiss the governess. A quiet dismissal would let the creature slink away intact and dangerous, free to talk. No. The Dowager Duchess of Ashbourne, who understood exactly how a person is destroyed because she had helped destroy a person before, decided to do it properly. She would expose the girl. She would do it in front of the entire assembled company on the last grand evening in the great drawing room, strip the false name off her in public, brand her a liar and a forger's brat before 40 witnesses, and have her flung from the house in such complete and witnessed disgrace that nothing she might ever afterwards say would carry the weight of a feather. No one believes the forger's daughter. No one ever has. The Dowager had built her whole safety on that single fact. And, this is the cruel symmetry of it, she would do it on the very night that Eleanor herself had chosen for her reckoning. The last evening. The full company. The world in one room. 2 women. 1 room. 1 night. Each of them walking toward it, certain that she was the one who would be holding the knife. And Julian, who knew who Eleanor was, who had carried it 2 days in hope and dread, Julian did not know his mother had found it out. He was watching Eleanor. He was not watching Lady Honoria. And so the Duke of Ashbourne moved toward that last evening believing he had time, believing the choosing of the moment was his. And all the while, 3 doors down the same corridor, his mother was already loading the gun. But before the drawing room, there was the garden. And I must give you the garden, because without it, the breaking point breaks the wrong way. It was the afternoon of the last day. Eleanor had taken Sophie and Augusta out to the long yew walk to keep them from being underfoot, while the great folk dressed for the evening. And there, between the dark, clipped hedges, with the children running ahead, she came face to face with the Duke of Ashbourne, who had not happened upon her at all, but had come there to find her. He sent the children on toward the fountain, with a word and a smile that they trusted, and then he turned to Eleanor, and Eleanor saw at once, with her room reader's eye, that something in him had changed, that the guard was not up, that the man in front of her had decided something. "Miss Grey," he said, and then quietly, watching her face the way a man watches to see whether a wound will bleed. "Or must I call you Miss Hartley?" The yew walk went very silent. Somewhere ahead, the children laughed at the fountain. Eleanor stood with 6 years of careful stillness and felt them shaking under her like a bridge in a flood. And she did not run, and she did not faint, and she did not deny it. She lifted her chin, and she looked the Duke of Ashbourne full in the face for the first time as herself, as Eleanor Hartley. And she said, "How long have you known?" 2 days. "And you have not had me removed?" "No." "Why not?" And here the steel came up in her voice, all of it, 6 years of it. "You know what I am. You know whose daughter I am. You know surely that I did not come to this house by accident. The heir of Ashbourne does not leave such a person under his roof. So either you are a fool, your grace, which you are not, or you are toying with me before you crush me, the way your family crushes everything it finds beneath it. Which is it?" She had meant to wound him. She watched the words go in, and the Duke of Ashbourne did not strike back, and did not freeze into marble, and did not summon the famous coldness. He flinched. She saw it, the real flinch of a real wound, and then he said something that took the floor out from under her entirely. "My father," said Julian, Duke of Ashbourne, slowly, as a man lifts a great weight he has carried alone too long, "destroyed your father. He forged those instruments himself. He perjured himself before the law. He let an innocent and gentle man be ruined and buried to save his own name, and he confessed it to me as he was dying, and I have known the truth of it, in my bones, for 6 years." He stopped. His voice was not steady. "I have known, and I have not had the courage to say it aloud. So you are wrong about only one thing, Miss Hartley. I am not toying with you. I am ashamed in front of you. There is a great difference, and I find I very much want you to know it." Eleanor stood in the yew-walk and could not speak. Everything she had built her 6 years upon, the simple, sustaining shape of it, the enemy on the gate, the cold air feeding off stolen plate, everything cracked down the middle and showed her something underneath that she had no defense prepared for. Not a monster, a fellow prisoner, a man carrying the very same corpse she carried, from the other end. And it was precisely because it cracked her that she did the thing she did next, because the human heart, when the ground gives way, snatches at the nearest solid-seeming thing. And the nearest solid thing to Eleanor's hand was suspicion. He could be lying. A clever man, learning he was discovered, would say exactly this, would make himself her fellow sufferer, disarm her, talk the letters gently out of her hands, and then, with the proof safely his, do whatever an Ashbourne does. She did not let herself soften. She told him only that she would think on what he had said, and she gathered the children, and she walked back to the house with her heart in chaos. And the chaos made her do one more thing, one small, fateful thing. That hour before dinner, instead of dressing, Eleanor slipped, as she had slipped down to the library that first night. A governess can go quietly anywhere, into the Duke's own study. She told herself she went to learn whether he had lied to her, to find some proof of the cold Ashbourne plotting before she let one honest-sounding speech in a garden turn her from 6 years' purpose. And in the Duke's study, in an unlocked drawer of his great desk, Eleanor found papers with her family's name upon them. Hartley. Sheet after sheet in the Duke's own hand. And in her chaos, in her hurry, in her terror of being made a fool, Eleanor read them exactly wrong. She saw Thomas Hartley. She saw sums of money. She saw the name of a school, an attorney, instructions, arrangements, a cold, methodical, years-long apparatus of the Duke of Ashbourne reaching into her brother's life and moving him about. And Eleanor, who did not know what a secret benefactor was, because she had never in 6 bitter years been given the smallest cause to imagine one, read those papers and felt the blood leave her face, because what she believed she was holding was proof that the Duke of Ashbourne had been watching her family, watching Thomas, keeping the broken Hartleys under quiet surveillance all these years, the way a careful man keeps an eye on a loose stone. Not kindness, control, containment. The garden speech a lie after all, and here the cold truth of the Ashbournes in her shaking hands. She did not stay to read it rightly. There was no time, and there was too much fear. She put the papers back and went up to dress with her heart turned to flint, and any softness the yew walk had cost her was burned clean away. And that, my friends, is the cruel engine of the whole night. Because Eleanor Hartley walked down into that drawing-room believing the Duke was her enemy after all, when the truth lying in that drawer was the precise and shining opposite, and she would not learn how wrong she was until the wrongness had very nearly cost them everything. And so we come back at last to the room where we began. You remember it. The 300 candles, the plum-coloured silk and the cold-hearted fire, the 40 glittering guests, Lady Caroline Vane near the front, waiting to be a duchess, the Duke beneath his father's portrait, and the Dowager Duchess of Ashbourne, choosing her moment with a general's eye, waiting for the room to be at its fullest and most attentive, and then rising and lifting one gloved finger down the length of her own drawing-room. "That woman," she said, "is a liar, a thief's daughter, and she will leave my house before this night is out. Now you have the whole of it. Now you know what every soul in that room did not. You know that the trembling-handed old woman was not defending her family from a stranger. She was trying to bury her own buried crime a second time. You know that the governess in grey had walked down those stairs already armed, already steeled, already carrying her father's innocence against her heart, and a misread page burning behind her eyes. And you know that the silent Duke beneath the portrait was not the cold villain the room believed him, but a man who had waited 6 years for a courage he did not have, about to discover in the next 5 minutes whether it had come. The Dowager laid the governess bare with 3 cold sentences: the false name, the forger father, the scandal stitched up and smuggled under a respectable roof. She did it beautifully. She had done this before. And 40 faces turned, and Lady Caroline's lip curled, and Mrs. Pemberton made a small sound of horror and edged her daughters away as though disgrace were a fever. And the trap closed exactly as the Dowager had built it to close. Except that Eleanor Hartley did not fall into it. She had been waiting, you see, for the world to be in one room. And the Dowager Duchess, meaning to destroy her, had just done her the one service no one else could have done, had gathered every eye in the house and turned it, hard and bright, upon her. Eleanor felt the old killing silence settle over the room, the silence she had stood inside 6 years before in a courtroom, the silence in which great men decide a small man's fate. And this time she did not stand small inside it. She let the Dowager finish, and then, into the gloating quiet, with her chin level and her voice carrying clear to every gilded corner, Eleanor Hartley set down the weight she had carried for 6 years. "My name is not Grey." The fire spat. No one breathed. "My name is Eleanor Hartley. I am the daughter of Sir Henry Hartley of Wexcombe, the man this family called a forger, the man this family ruined, the man who died of it." She drew from the folds of her grey gown the slim packet of letters, tied in its faded ribbon, and lifted it into the candlelight where 40 people could see it. "And I did not come to this house to hide. I came to it to give back, in front of witnesses, the truth that was taken from my father in front of witnesses. These are letters. They are written in the hand of the late Duke of Ashbourne, and they prove, past any denying, past any duke's word against any dead man's, that it was he who forged those instruments, he who perjured himself, and that my father went to his grave an innocent man, so that the name of Ashbourne might go on unspotted." The room made a sound then, a long, low, rushing sound, like wind through a wheat field, 40 people drawing breath at once. "You wicked, scheming creature." The Dowager had gone the colour of ash, and her voice for the first time in the memory of anyone present had lost its smooth, cold edge and come out cracked. Those are forgeries, more forgeries. It is in the blood. You all heard her own father was— Then let them be read, said Eleanor, and let this whole company judge the hand. And she turned, with the letters held out, away from the old woman, and toward the man beneath the portrait. And she asked him the question we began with, soft and terrible and final. Read them aloud, Your Grace. Or shall I? I want you to imagine being him, in that moment, the Duke of Ashbourne, beneath the painted face of the man who made all of this, with his whole world hanging on the next thing he chose to do. He could destroy her. Understand that completely, because the choice was real and it was his. He was the most powerful man in the room and in the county. The law would lean his way as it had always leaned his family's way. His mother had already laid the ground, branded the girl a liar and a forger's brat before 40 witnesses. He had only to let his famous coldness fall. To say, in that quiet, ruinous voice the county told its warning stories about, the woman is an impostor and these papers are a fraud. Remove her, and it would be done. Eleanor Hartley would be carried out into the dark, a discredited servant, and no court and no drawing room in England would ever again give her a hearing, and the Ashbourne name would close back over the truth like water over a stone. His father's name. His own name. The name his mother had given her whole life to keep clean. Every interest he had, every comfort, every advantage of the world he had been born at the very summit of. All of it told him, in that suspended and candle-lit moment, to crush her. And here is the reversal, my friends. Here is the thing 6 years had been building toward. Because the Duke of Ashbourne looked at the letters held out across the silent room, and he looked at the woman holding them, steady and unafraid, and alone, exactly as her father had once stood alone. And Julian found, at last, in the only moment it could ever have counted, the courage that had failed him for 6 years. He crossed the room. 40 people watched the Duke of Ashbourne walk the length of his own drawing room to the disgraced governess, and he did not take the letters from her to make them vanish. He took them from her gently, with both hands, the way you take something holy. And then he turned to face the room, his world, his mother. And the Duke of Ashbourne began to read his father's crime aloud. He read in a clear and steady voice, and he did not stop. He read the instructions in the old Duke's hand. You will sign the enclosed. Do not trouble yourself with the figures. That is my affair. He read the letter with the false securities named plainly in it. He read the careless, glittering, monstrous phrase, our little fiction, and he let it hang in the air of that beautiful room until every soul present understood it. And when he had finished reading, he looked up, and into a silence you could have broken like glass, the Duke of Ashbourne said, The hand is my father's. There is not a man in this county who has seen the late Duke's writing who could stand here and tell you otherwise, and I will not insult your eyes or this lady's courage by pretending. Every word she has told you is true. Sir Henry Hartley was an honest man. He was destroyed, knowingly by my father, to shield this family's name. And that name, the name some of you have crossed 3 counties to be seen beside this autumn, has been from that day to this one a thing with a dead, innocent man underneath it. Julian. The Dowager's voice was barely a voice at all now. Julian, stop. You do not know what you are. I know exactly what I am doing, Mother. He did not raise his voice. He had never, in all the county's warning stories, raised his voice. I am doing the thing I have been a coward about for 6 years, and you will not stop me because you knew. He looked at her then, and the whole room followed his eyes, and the Dowager Duchess of Ashbourne stood pinned in the candlelight by her own son's gaze. You knew at the time. I have wondered, and now your face tells me plainly. You knew, and you helped the world forget, and you would have had this lady thrown into the dark tonight to keep it forgotten a second time. That is finished. It is finished now. And then he did the thing that turned a confession into a reversal, the thing that took the last of the ground from under his own feet and gave it, deliberately, to her. And so that no one in this room, and no court that may follow it, can pretend these letters stand alone. The Duke of Ashbourne reached into his own coat and drew out a folded document, worn soft at the creases as a thing much handled in private is worn soft. I will add to them this. My father did not only confess to me with his dying breath. In the last clear days before the fever took him entirely, racked with the fear of his own soul, he made his confession a second time, fully and in detail and in writing, to his own chaplain and to a magistrate he trusted, and it was set down and signed and witnessed and given into my keeping. I have had it for 6 years. His voice did not break, but it came very low. I have had it for 6 years, and I kept it locked in a drawer, because I had everything to lose by it, and I told myself the dead could not be repaid. I was wrong. The dead cannot be repaid. But the living can, and the truth can be told. And I am ashamed only that it took the bravest person in this house walking into it, uninvited, to make me find the spine to do it. He held the two things together now in the candlelight. The dead forger's hidden letters and the dead duke's signed confession. And Eleanor Hartley understood, in a single overturning instant, the whole shape of how wrong she had been. The papers in the study, Thomas Hartley, the school, the attorney, the arrangements, not surveillance, not a cold man keeping a loose stone watched. She understood it now, all at once, and the understanding put a hand around her heart. For 6 years there had been an invisible friend at her brother's school, warm clothes in the bad winters, a doctor when his chest closed up, the quiet promise of a trade and a future, a friend the boy had never been able to name. And Eleanor had wept gratitude into her pillow more than one night for a kindness she had assumed came from some old friend of her father's. It had come from here. It had come from this man. The heir of the house that destroyed them had been in the dark, where it could win him nothing and cost him only money and risk, the secret keeper of the last Hartley boy, paying down in silence a debt he had been too afraid to pay aloud, until a governess in grey gave him no choice but to pay all of it, in the light, in front of the world. Now look at the room. Look at what has happened in it, because this is the reversal entire, and I want you to see every inch of it. The Dowager Duchess of Ashbourne, who had walked into this room its absolute mistress, who had built the whole evening as an engine to destroy a powerless governess, stood exposed before 40 witnesses as the keeper of a wicked silence, her power gone out of her like breath, an old woman in a corner whom no one now would meet in the eye. Lady Caroline Vane, who had come to Ashbourne to collect a duke and a great name, was already turning to her mother with a face gone hard and calculating, the engagement that was never quite an engagement dissolving in real time, because no careful family marries into a name with a dead, innocent man underneath it. The glittering guests, who an hour before would have stepped over Eleanor in the road, were staring at the governess in grey, as though a window had opened in a wall they had thought was solid stone. And the power in that room, the real power, the power to decide what the truth was, which this family had hoarded for generations the way the old duke hoarded his stolen credit. That power was no longer standing beneath the portrait. It was standing in a worn grey gown, in a pair of soft cuffed sleeves, in the steady, unjewelled, unbroken person of Eleanor Hartley. The powerless woman held the room. The powerful man had, with his own hands and his own voice, given it to her, laid his name and his comfort and his whole inherited world down at her feet, and asked by the act for nothing back. That is a reversal. Not because the strong was struck down by the weak, but because the strong finally chose the truth over the strength, and in the choosing made himself, for the first time in his life, a man worth the weak one's mercy. The truth, once it is finally let out of a room, does not stay in the room. It goes everywhere, and it does not go gently, and I will not pretend to you that what followed that night was easy, because it was not. A reckoning is not a door closing. It is a door opening onto a great deal of weather. The letters and the confession together were more than enough. In the months that followed, the law, which had moved so swiftly and so surely against a friendless baronet 6 years before, was made to move again, slowly and reluctantly, and under the steady, unrelenting pressure of a duke who would not let it rest. The case of Sir Henry Hartley was reopened, and in time, in the dry, careful language of the courts, the verdict that had broken him was set aside, and his name, the honest name he had told his daughter outlasts a great one, was entered again into the record clean. It was late. It was unforgivably late. It could not give Eleanor back the sunlit room, or the walled garden, or the gentle man who had kept bees and could not pass a wounded creature. The dead cannot be repaid. Julian had said so himself, and it was true. But Sir Henry Hartley was no longer, in the eyes of England, a forger. His grandchildren, whoever they might one day be, would inherit a clean name. Eleanor had done the thing she set out across 6 years to do. She had given her father back the only thing he had ever truly owned, and the House of Ashbourne paid. I want to be honest about that, because a story that pretends the truth is free is a story that is lying to you. The Ashbourne name was not destroyed. Names that old and that rich are very hard to destroy. But it was marked, and it stayed marked. Doors that had always opened did not all open now. The Dowager Duchess, exposed in her long silence, withdrew from the world that had been her whole kingdom. She went to Pioz, live very quietly at a small house on a far edge of the estate, and she and her son did not speak for a long time. And when at last they did, it was carefully, and as two people who knew exactly what the other had done. Julian did not marry Lady Caroline Vane. That arrangement had walked out of the drawing-room and not come back, and he was, the county now whispered, a much diminished match. He had spent a great inheritance of consequence, in one evening, on the truth. He has told Eleanor since that it was the only honest purchase he ever made, and that he counts the change in his own favour. For Thomas, it meant a future at last, brought up into the open. The boy, a young man now, finished his apprenticeship to his kind apothecary, the trade, and the chance that an invisible friend had quietly bought him long before he had a name to thank, and he learned at last whose friend it had been. And the boy and Julian, in time, came to a wary and then a true regard for one another, which I think mended something in the Duke that the courts never could. But I expect you want to know about the other thing. You have been patient, and you have earned it. And so I will tell you about Eleanor and the Duke. It was not quick, and it should not have been, and I would not respect either of them if it had been. You cannot cross 6 years and a dead father and an evening like that one in a single bound, and they did not try to. When the drawing-room emptied, Eleanor was still a woman who had walked into that house to ruin him, and Julian was still the son of the man who had ruined her, and neither of them was foolish enough to mistake the wreckage of a great revelation for the soft ground of a beginning. They parted that night as two people who had told each other the whole truth, which is a rare and serious bond, but it is not the same thing as love. She did not stay at Ashbourne. She would not. Her pride would not have it, and Julian, to his great credit, understood her pride well enough not to insult it by asking. With her father's name cleared, certain small things came back to the Hartleys, not the old estate, that was long gone, but enough, a modest enough competence, that Eleanor Hartley need never again sit a half step apart from anyone's table or be spoken of as furniture with good references. She took a small house. She had her brother. She had her own name back, out loud, in the daylight. After 6 years of being grey, Eleanor Hartley was, at last, simply and entirely herself, and beholden to no one. And I want you to sit with that, because that, and not what comes next, is the true victory of this story. She was free. She was free first. Everything that came after, she came to as a free woman, choosing. And Julian courted her. There is no grander word for it, and it needs no grander word. The Duke of Ashbourne, who could have had, before that evening, the pick of glittering England, spent the following year, and more simply and patiently, making himself known to a woman who owed him nothing, and was in a position, for the first time in her life, to refuse anyone she pleased. He wrote to her. He came when she permitted it, and went when she did not. He did not come as a duke, condescending to a governess. That man was gone, and good riddance. He came as what the truth had left him, a humbled man, of marked name and diminished consequence, who had done one brave thing late and was trying, slowly, to become someone for whom it would not have been late. And Eleanor, who had spent 6 years with her own face shut like a door, found that with this one particular person, and only at her own chosen pace, she was beginning to let it stand open. She told me once, for I have had this story, you understand, from a source very near to it, that what she came to love in him was not his rank, which she had every reason to despise, and not even his kindness to Thomas, though that had moved her to the bone. What she came to love was the moment in the drawing-room, the moment he crossed the floor. Because she had stood in a courtroom at 18 and watched a roomful of powerful men look at the ground rather than say a true and costly thing, and she had carried that, the cowardice of the comfortable, as the great wound of her life. And then, 6 years later, in another grand room, she had watched one powerful man do the opposite. Walk toward the truth instead of away from it. Pay for it instead of pocketing the change. That, she said, was the thing she had not believed existed, and once she had seen with her own eyes that it existed, she found she could not unsee it, and she did not want to. They married in the spring, quietly, in the small grey country church near her small house, with Thomas there, and the kind apothecary, and not one single member of glittering England who had turned its back. She did not become a great duchess, sailing into ballrooms. That was never what either of them was for. They lived, by the standard of his birth, almost simply, and by the standard of hers, in great peace. And Ashbourne Park, that cold and beautiful argument in stone, slowly, under a master who had been broken open and a mistress who had been forged hard and true, began for the first time in its long, proud history to feel a little less like a museum and a little more like a home. So, there it is, the whole of it. I have told you a story tonight about a great house, and a ruined one, about a name bought with a dead man's grave, and a name carried 6 years, Dabchabiks, in the bottom of a trunk. But if you take only one thing away from your fire, and out into the dark with you, let it be this. And I mean it as much for the powerful among you as for the powerless, because both were in that drawing room and both had a choice to make. The truth does not die, because no one will hear it. A gentle man said that to his daughter with almost the last breath he had, and he was right. It can be buried, and it can be locked in a drawer, and it can be silenced for 6 years or for 60, and it does not die. It only waits, patient as a governess in grey, for someone, anyone, powerful or powerless, to find at last the courage to say it out loud. Eleanor Hartley found that courage uninvited. Julian Ashbourne found it late and at ruinous cost, and still in time. And between the two of them, they proved the gentle baronet right, and gave him back his name. And I rather think that is as fine an ending as a story of this hard world is ever likely to give us. Thank you for sitting by my fire. Truly, wherever in the world you are, and whatever hour it has become, while we have been away together in Regency, England, thank you. If this story moved you even a little, then do the small kind thing and subscribe to Jane Tells Stories, so that the next tale I unfold finds its way to you the way this one did. I have a great many more of these waiting, and if you will not subscribe, well, then like a duke who owes a debt in the dark, you simply owe me one. I shall remember, I always do. Until the next story, go gently and be brave with the truth when your moment comes. Good night.